Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So I have been known to build some pretty strange and off-the-wall decks. I've always liked to take a commander or a concept and, flip it on its head or do something completely unexpected. Like my Mad Lad Marathon Monuments deck, otherwise known as Tribeless Marathon. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, make sure you check it out at some point, probably after this one. Because, of course, the Mad Lad Mitch is back at it again with this episode. So what kind of insane deck do I have in store for you? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Now, before we jump into the deck, let's start with a story about a younger Mitch who really wanted to break Modern on a budget. This was years ago, and at the time I built a $10 mono-white Modern deck and took it to a tournament. Yeah, if I was going to be on a budget, I knew I was going to be able to afford fetch lands, so I stuck with one color. And I knew I'd have to win with somewhat of a strange and unexpected combo with that kind of a deck. So the deck revolved around multiple combos, but the most potent one was with Leonin Relic Warder, Phyrexian Metamorph, and Ultra the Brood. The only Relic Warder says when it enters the battlefield, you may exile target artifact or enchantment, and when it leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. And then Phyrexian Metamorph is a shapeshifter that can enter the battlefield as a copy of an artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact next to its other types. And yes, because I didn't want to spend a lot of money on fetch lands or whatnot, I included this in my mono-white deck, because, you can just pay the 2 life instead of paying that blue cost. Regardless, the final part of the combo was a card like Ultra the Brood. It says whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each one puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So basically, the combo works like this. You have Ultra the Brood and Leonin Relic Warder in play. Then you cast Phyrexian Metamorph, making it a copy of Leonin Relic Warder. So you get the ETB and you can exile target artifact or enchantment. And thanks to the way that Phyrexian Metamorph is worded, it's still an artifact when it's doing all this, so you can essentially just have it target itself. So you target itself to exile itself, and then when that happens, you return the exiled card back to the battlefield under its owner's control. So then it comes back and you have become a copy of the Relic Warder, and then you have it exile itself again, and again, and again, and you see where this is going. So you can get as many ETBs as you need to for Ultra the Brood, which is going to mill out your opponent. You could also have other combos in the deck like Leonin Relic Warder, Fiend Hunter, and Oblivion Ring. Fiend Hunter has when it enters the battlefield, it may exile another target creature, and when it leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. An Oblivion Ring is essentially the exact same thing, but as an enchantment and for any non-land permanent. The Leonin Relic Warder is in play, you cast the Fiend Hunter to exile the Relic Warder, then you cast the Oblivion Ring to exile the Fiend Hunter. The Relic Warder comes back, exiling the Oblivion Ring, bringing back the Fiend Hunter, and the cycle continues. So essentially you can just keep exiling one and then the other, and then they keep looping. And of course, in Modern, where you can use 4 of one card, you could even make this work just with 3 Fiend Hunters. Now that doesn't work in Commander, unfortunately, because we can only have 1 Fiend Hunter. Or can we? Basically, even though I didn't break Modern with a $10 mono-white Fiend Hunter Blinky deck thingy, that doesn't matter. I really enjoyed the synergies of that deck, and recently I just happened to be thinking about it. And then that got me thinking, how can I take inspiration from that deck and turn it into a really fun and pretty out there Commander deck? And as for the commander of this deck, let's just say it's 5 color for the time being, and we'll get to exactly who this commander is and why here in a bit. So with all of that explained, let me introduce you to the deck that I'm calling Hunter Tribal. So of course, the first of our hunters is none other than Fiend Hunter. Again, Fiend Hunter has, when it enters the battlefield, you may exile another target creature, and when it leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Fiend Hunter is a perfect hunter for us because it is flexible. We can utilize it to temporarily get rid of an opponent's creature, or we can utilize it for our loop. And then a less flexible but still effective card in this deck is Wormfang Drake. When it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice it unless you exile a creature you control other than Wormfang Drake. And when it leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this only lets us exile one of our own creatures, but again, in a lot of situations, that can be very helpful. Speaking of which, there's Yannick Scavenging Sentinel, which partners with the Kara Lair Scavenger, and we'll get to her here in a second. Yannick has, when it enters the battlefield, exile another creature you control until Yannick leaves the battlefield. When you do, distribute X++1 counters from among any number of target creatures where X the exiled creature's power. So Yannick is fantastic for this deck's purposes. It acts as a hunter for our own creatures and also lets us get a lot of counters onto our creatures. In fact, again, if we're looping as many times as we want to, that's an infinite number of counters on creatures. Or for you rules layers out there, yes, you need to specify a number, so 1 trillion, okay? Regardless, Yannick is also fantastic in this deck because, again, it partners with another card. The Kara Lair Scavenger says whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had one or more counters on it, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So again, with Yannick, we can distribute counters to our creatures, and we've got plenty of ways to make creatures leave the battlefield, so yeah, we can utilize this to draw a lot of cards. And as I've said many times before, in a game of Commander, 1 card per 1 life is well worth it. Anyways, next up, let's talk about some bigger exile effects with Lumbering Battlement and Glorious Protector. Lumbering Battlement says when it enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-token creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. And it gets +2/+2 for each card exiled with it. Now that additional power and toughness is nice, but again, that's not really the point of this card in this deck. This is sort of like a mass Fiend Hunter effect for this deck. We can exile a bunch of creatures, and then when we exile this, we get all those back. So of course, in this deck, we're going to be running various creatures with different kinds of ETBs that can really help us out, and by being able to exile all of them, we can get all their ETBs again. Now we'll get to those creatures here in a bit, but before we do, let's talk about Glorious Protector. Glorious Protector has a foretell cost of 2 and a white, and she's got Flash and Flying, and when she enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of non-angel creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield. So essentially, kind of like a Lumbering Battlement, but at flash speed and for non-angel creatures. But again, in this deck, we've got a ton of options to target with this. Speaking of which, next up, let's talk about Feldar Guardian. Feldar Guardian is an infamous combo piece from Standard from quite a while ago, but anyways, it is also a fantastic piece in this deck. It has when it enters the battlefield, may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So unlike the previous hunters that we've talked about, this one isn't dependent on getting that card back when it leaves the battlefield, it just basically blinks it and gets it right back. Because of that, this one can go infinite incredibly easily. In fact, it can go infinite with either of these 2 cards, Wispeaver Angel or Restoration Angel, on top of a lot of other ones, but we'll get to those here in a bit. Anyways, Wispeaver Angel says when it enters the battlefield, it may exile another target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So yeah, even just with these 2, Feldar Guardian and Wispeaver Angel, we can get infinite ETBs. One comes into play, it exiles the other one one comes into play, it exiles that one, and so on and so forth. And then Restoration Angel has Flash and Flying, and when it enters the battlefield, it may exile target non-angel creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So obviously, Restoration Angel can go infinite with Feldar Guardian, but not Wispeaver Angel. But next up, let's talk about 3 perhaps unexpected hunters for this deck with Changeling Berserker, Changeling Hero, and Changeling Titan. Now, first off, each of these have Changeling, which means that this card is every creature type at all times, and we'll get to why this matters here in a bit. But what makes them hunters is that they each have champion a creature. That means that when this creature enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you exile another creature you control, and when this leaves the battlefield, that card returns to the battlefield. So these are essentially hunter-type effects, again like a Wormfang Drake. Usually being forced to exile a creature or sacrificing this one would be a downside, but in this case it's definitely an upside. Now you might be thinking, okay, yeah, these make good hunters, but why does the fact that they're changelings matter? You did mention that, didn't you? And to show why that matters, let's first talk about the golden pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And I have been in love with this card ever since I saw it, and I've been looking for a way to make this card work in a deck, and I finally have found it with this one, and that card is, of course, Deathbellow Warcry. Deathbellow Warcry is a sorcery for 5 red, so 8 mana in total, but it is well worth that cost. It says, search your library for up to 4 Minotaur creature cards with different names, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Now, we might not have any Minotaurs in this deck, but what we do have are Changelings. Because again, Changelings are Minotaurs no matter where they're at. I mean, they're also, spirits and soldiers and humans and birds or whatnot, but Minotaur is what applies here, okay? So we cast this and go get 4 Changelings, 3 of which are the ones that we just talked about. Each of those has champion a creature, so when they come into play, we're going to stack their triggers like this. The first one comes into play and we champion any of our creatures. Doesn't matter what it is, has to be something else that's already in play. So maybe that's our commander, which I promise we will get to here in just a second. Regardless, the second champion Changeling comes into play, exiling the first. So whatever original creature we exile with the first one comes back into play. And then the third Changeling comes in, exiling the second. The first comes back in, exiling the third, and so on and so forth. Deathbellow Warcry, a Minotaur tribal card, goes and gets us the exact loop that we need. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty spicy. And speaking of spicy, it's time to talk about the incredibly strange commander for this incredibly strange deck. So the commander for this deck is, of course, Reaper King. I told you it was strange. Anyways, Reaper King is a 6/6 scarecrow that costs 2 or a white, 2 or a blue, 2 or a black, 2 or a red, and 2 or a green, or essentially either Wooburg or somewhere between Wooburg and 10 generic mana. Regardless, it says other scarecrow creatures you control get +1/+1. But the important part is that it has, whenever another scarecrow enters the battlefield under your control, destroy target permanent. So the commander is just one of the ways that this deck can win. Obviously, if we cast Deathbellow Warcry and go infinite with those changelings, well, we're having an infinite number of scarecrows, because again, they're changelings, enter the battlefield. Or again, rules lawyers out there, instead of infinite, as many as we want. Essentially, we can just blow up all of our opponent's things, yes, including their lands. So yeah, they lose from there. So yeah, again, this deck is pretty strange. We cast a Minotaur tribal tutor card to go get some changelings, which are also scarecrows, to blow everything up. Now again, this is just one way to win, and actually when I started building this deck, I built it with a different commander in mind, and we'll talk about that commander and the other ones that I was considering in a bit. But when I was looking for a commander for this deck, I was looking for one that was at least 4, if not 5 colors, and one that could help out with either winning or providing card advantage, etc, etc. So yeah, Reaper King definitely fit the mold. And keep in mind that you just need one changeling in the loop to actually win with this. So you don't have to cast Deathbellow Warcry to go get those 3, there are other ways to win. And of course, outside of Reaper King, there are plenty of other win conditions, because we're not just going to depend on getting one of those changelings. But before we talk about those win conditions, let's talk about yet another changeling that helps us out in a very different way, and some other cards like it. And that changeling would be the fantastic Morite of the Frost. Morite of the Frost is a 0/0 shapeshifter with changeling that costs 2 green, blue, blue. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a permanent you control, except it's legendary and no addition to its other types, and if it's a creature, it enters with 2 additional +1 counters on it and has changeling. So this is a changeling clone for any of our permanents. And this actually can help us out in a lot of ways. First off, I did mention that we've got some other creatures in this deck with some various ETBs that can help us out, so yeah, we can just clone that and get whatever ETB it is. And because it retains itself being a changeling, when it comes into play, our commander triggers and we blow up a permanent. But perhaps most importantly, because it's a clone, well, we can just make it a clone of one of our hunters. So instead of depending on just those hunters to create that loop, we've also got clones to help us out as well. And speaking of clones, of course, we're going to be running other ones like, well, Clone, Mirror Image, and Protean Raider. Clone is the original clone, which is why its name is Clone, of course. Anyways, it's a 0/0 that can enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. And then Mirror Image can enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature we control, and again, that's what's important for this deck. Protean Raider has Raid. If you attack with a creature this turn, you may have Protean Raider enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Regardless, again, of what these clones are or what they do, the fact that they can clone is incredibly impactful for this deck. And if we really need to, these can actually act as removal spells as well. Although they don't have Changeling unless we're targeting a Changeling, they're not going to trigger our commander. But if we desperately need to get rid of something, well, we can just, clone our commander, and then the clone dies, but we still get that trigger to destroy target permanent. Regardless, of course, we've got more clones like Wall of Stolen Identity, Vizier of Many Faces, and Altered Ego. You may have Wall of Stolen Identity enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's a wall in addition to its other types and has Defender. When you do, tap the copy creature, and it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Wall of Stolen Identity. So we can also use this to shut down a creature if we need to. And then Vizier of Many Faces has Embalm, and it's basically a clone that we can bring back. And Altered Ego can't be countered, and we can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it comes into play with X +1/+1 counters on it. So this is a tough to deal with clone that can come in even bigger. Next up, some more clones that we're going to be running are Evil Twin, Mercurial Pretender, and Vesuvian Shapeshifter. Evil Twin is essentially a clone that can kill the creature that it copies by paying blue and black and tapping it. And then Mercurial Pretender we can actually bounce back to our hand by paying 2 blue, and then we can just, recast it and clone something else. And the Vesuvian Shapeshifter can also change what it cloned. Essentially, it can morph and unmorph itself to become a copy of another creature. And finally, we can even clone a creature in a graveyard with Body Double. This can come in really handy, especially when we have a key piece in our graveyard. Oh, and also, I forgot to mention, but with all these clones, they essentially all go infinite with those key pieces like Feldar Guardian and Wisp-Weaver Angel. So again, though most of our loops do require 3 creatures, there are some combos that only require 2. But of course, we've also got other ways for our clones and our hunters to generate value. First up, we can reset a clone or a hunter if we need to with cards like Ephemerate, Cloud Shift, and Essence Flux. Ephemerate says exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it's got Rebound. And then Cloud Shift and Essence Flux essentially the same, but without the Rebound. These cards can be fantastic to essentially reset a hunter or a clone if we need to. If we have something exiled with a Fiend Hunter type card and we need to get its ETB or whatnot, we can just do that. Or if we want the clone to become a clone of something else and get a different ETB, we can do that as well. Or these can even be a way to start the loop if we've got some key pieces in play and we just need to reset one of them. Regardless, because these cards are so valuable and flexible, we're going to be running more of them like Turn to Mist and Momentary Blink. Turn to Mist exiles a creature, but that creature comes back at the beginning of the next end step. And then Momentary Blink exiles a creature and brings it right back, and we can also flash it back for 3 and a blue. But some even bigger exile effects come from cards like Ghostly Flicker, Eerie Interlude, and Semester's End. Ghostly Flicker says, exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their control. Eerie Interlude says, exile any number of target creatures you control, return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And then Semester's End is somewhat similar. It says, exile any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers you control at the beginning of the next end step, return each of them to the battlefield under their owner's control. Each of them enters the battlefield with additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. So again, these mass blink effects can help us out in a lot of ways, especially when combined with some of the creatures that have ETBs that can provide us a lot of value. For example, we've got some creatures that have some ETBs that can help ramp us with Farhaven Elf, Springbloom Druid, and Rootweaver Druid. So if we blink or exile one of these and bring it back or clone it, yeah, we're going to be getting some extra value and some extra ramp. And speaking of extra value, let's talk about some creatures that can help us out with card draw with Muldrifter, Cloud Blazer, and Riverwise Augur. When Muldrifter comes into play, we draw 2, Cloud Blazer does that, plus we gain 2 life, and Riverwise Augur is basically a brainstorm on a body. So again, no matter how we get their ETB again, whether it's cloning, blinking, or exiling and bringing them back, we're going to be getting a lot of value out of them. And we're also going to be running cards like Amrith the Lustrous, Karuga the Macro Sage, and Soul the Harvest. Amrith has, whenever their permanent enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it shares a card type with that permanent, you may reveal the card and put in your hand. Again, with this deck, we're going to be having a ton of creatures come into play and leave play and come back into play, so if we've got creatures on top, they're going to be coming into our hand. And then Karuga has, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. We've got a lot of cards that meet that requirement, so we're going to be drawing a lot with this throughout the game. Speaking of which, there's Soul the Harvest, which says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Yeah, this can draw us an absurd amount of cards, especially, if we clone it, because it's not legendary, so have fun. We've also got some enchantments that can help us out as well, like Elemental Bond, Season of Growth, and Path of Discovery. Elemental Bond says whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Again, a lot of our creatures meet that requirement, so we're going to be drawing quite a few cards with this. And then Season of Growth says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. Now, scrying isn't card advantage, but it is card selection, so that can really help us out throughout the game. Speaking of which, there's Path of Discovery, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. Essentially, that means that we get lands off the top of our library into our hand, or we basically surveil and we get a counter on that creature. Now, all these value cards and ETBs are great, but outside of our commander and those changelings, how do we actually win? So of course, we're going to be making use of some fantastic cards like Impact Tremors, Warstorm Surge, and Mirror March. Impact Tremors says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So again, if we're looping our creatures, although it's just 1 damage at a time, we can do it as many times as we want. So yeah, our opponents are going to be very, very dead. And then Warstorm Surge is somewhat similar yet different. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So with our creatures, we can ping down creatures or planeswalkers or, players, because that's how we win. And then Mirror March can help us out in a different way. It says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under control, flip a coin until you lose a flip. For each flip that you've won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste, exile them, begin the next end step. So first off, yes, this obviously can be a win condition. If we keep having, say, a Fiend Hunter enter the battlefield an infinite number of times, well, we can just keep making token copies of it that have haste. Yes, technically we have to flip coins, but yeah, if we do this a trillion times, chances are we'll win half as many of those, so that's still gonna be enough to, kill our opponents with those creatures. Also, this can just be a great value card for us even when we're not comboing off. If we've got a creature coming into play that has an ETB that generates us value, well, we have a chance of getting even more value out of that. The more coin flips we win, the more value we get. So yeah, this can be a value generator / win condition for us. Speaking of which, let's talk about Outpost Siege. When it enters the battlefield, we choose either Khans or Dragons. If we choose Khans at the beginning of our upkeep, exile the top card of our library. Until the end of the turn, we can play that card. So, temporary card advantage is a nice thing to have if we need it. But the way that we can win with this card is with Dragons. It says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. So again, with a trillion or so LTB triggers, we can ping everything down, including our opponent's faces. And finally, there's Corpse Knight, which is a creature that can even help us win as well, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, each opponent loses 1 life. So yeah, this can easily drain out our opponents in absolutely no time. And again, remember, on top of all of these, our commander, the Reaper King, is an option for us to win with. But if you don't want to run the Reaper King or don't want to win in that way, or just want a different commander as an option to run for this deck, let me walk you through a few I considered. The first of which is a new commander that's not even out yet, but it has been spoiled from the upcoming set, D&D Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, with Tiamat. Tiamat is a 7/7 dragon god with flying that costs 2 in Wooburg. She has, when Tiamat enters the battlefield, if you cast it, search your library for up to 5 dragon cards not named Tiamat that each have different names, reveal them, put them in your hand, then shuffle. So this is a 5-color commander, which can tutor up our changelings, which again, yes, on top of being minotaurs and scarecrows, are also dragons. So we can go get our champion changelings and more out of the frost, and we can have fun from there. And speaking of tutoring up changelings, there's General Tazri. General Tazri is a 3/4 human ally that costs 4 and a white. When she enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an ally creature card, reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle. And by paying Wooburg, ally creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of colors among those creatures. So this is also a 5-color commander that can tutor up a creature, in this case an ally, but again, our changelings are also allies. And by blinking her or cloning her, we can go get more of them, and then yeah, we can just loop. Another 5-color commander for us to consider though that has an ETB is Niv-Mizzet Reborn. Niv-Mizzet Reborn is a 6/6 dragon avatar with flying that costs Wooburg. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them, put the chosen cards into your hand, then you rest them on your library in a random order. There are quite a few fantastic 2-color cards in this deck that this can get off the top for us. So again, this can be a great target for a blink spell or for a clone. Next up, how about Essica, God of the Tree / the Prismatic Bridge? Now the front side of Essica is nice, but not what we need for this deck. The back side is the Prismatic Bridge, which is a Wooburg legendary enchantment. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library to reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and you rest them on your library in a random order. Again, most of the creatures in this deck are either clones or hunters, so yeah, getting some of those off the top of our library for free each turn can easily help us end the game. Now, another potential option that I want to bring up is Jegantha the Wellspring. Jegantha is a 5/5 elemental elk that costs 4 and a Gruul, and it has tap add Wooburg. This mana can't be spent to pay generic mana cost. So if you want a more unassuming commander and one that might not be as threatening to your opponents, this could be a very good option. In some groups, the Reaper King as your commander can scare your opponents and make you a target early. So using a commander like Jegantha can help you cast spells while not being as big of a target. And speaking of not making yourself a target, how about Kanaos and Hero of Meletis? Kanaos and Hero of Meletis are a 2/8 human soldier that costs red, green, white, blue, so everything but black. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Each player may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield, then each opponent who didn't draws a card. So this commander is seen by many as a group hug commander. So by using this as your commander, you can kind of mask what you're actually trying to do with this deck. Now you are losing a color to do this, but there really aren't that many black cards in the deck as it is. So if you're willing to go down to 4 color, this is actually a fantastic option. But with all that said, it really is time for me to wrap things up. And I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this deck, so make sure you comment below. So let me know what you think about the deck, and let me know which commander that you'd select for this deck. And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.